into the Gnar, where the cutting edge of software gets built. We're going to talk about real builds, real decisions, real consequences, the moments where things went sideways and how they got back on track. You don't have to cut corners to move fast. You need great people, you need great process, and that's what creates speed in the end.
One bad line of context is probably 100 lines of bad code.
We spent the last 10 plus years building software for companies of all sizes, from scrappy startups to $100 million operators and beyond. The gap between how software gets talked about and how it actually gets built is where most of the damage happens. This is Into the Gnar.
All right, Nick, we're back after chatting with Matt Ferrer last week, president at Johnny O. It's just going to be the two of us today, but I've really been thinking a lot about our last episode and been fascinated by just like the complexity of Johnny O's Johnny O. Matt always makes fun of me for calling it Johnny O's like it's a cereal, but it's a complex business. They've got 5 different businesses rolled into one, whether it's a placement in stores like pro shops, they've got a direct to consumer online business, brick and mortar stores. Then in addition to all that, you've got the operational and financial management, just so many channels and systems all within one company. And it really got me thinking, we preach slow is smooth is fast all the time. And I think in a large, complex organization, it's despite the pressure to adopt AI, it's even more important to really understand what your goals are and like take it slow so that you have an effective rollout, because it could get messy quick if they just scrambled to get something going right away.
Yeah, and I really appreciated his candid responses. Exactly like you said, you can jump in and go bonkers on AI and all the things, but just being very deliberate and thoughtful is what everyone needs to do, but also think through what is core to your brand. And he really emphasized like authenticity, like whether it's the clothing they're producing or their culture in general. And it's just very refreshing to hear that be top of mind and be part of conversations with AI, because I do think that's really important. And there is a very non-technical aspect to all of this.
Yeah, staying authentically human while getting the efficiency gains of AI is going to be a challenge that a lot of brands need to focus on. And I'm sure we'll get some fun examples of companies that do that well and not well. All right. And so that's going to be our whole episode. We asked Matt last week a lot about how Johnny O is thinking about AI. And this week, it's going to be Nick and I. We're going to play a game that we play with each other, usually related to client projects and prospects, where we get some exposure into a bit how a business works, and we're able to put on our nerd hats and look for the inefficiencies and where the bottlenecks are, look for opportunities that in many cases we're able to relay back to clients and prospects that we're working with. But at the very least, we're able to have some fun together and figure out what we would do if we were in their shoes. So we'll take out a client example and play a little bit of that game. And we're going to start with the news. So let's get into it. Welcome back to Into the Gnar, where the cutting edge of software gets built. I'm Mike Stone, here with my co-founder and co-host, Nick Maloney. Today's a solo one. It's just the two of us. We're playing a game. Like I said, we play this off the mic constantly. We're going to pick a business, the kind that no one's making documentaries about, and we'll figure out what we'd do if we were in it. Today's victim, this is riffing off of a real world scenario, but it is a $75 million industrial distributor. They have real revenue, loyal customers, spreadsheets everywhere, and a part-time IT guy named Dave. Well done, Dave. If you run a company like that, this one's for you. So let's get into it. Starting out with some news this week, the first story here is about vertical AI. For about a decade, the software world has been run on horizontal tools. It's one CRM for everybody, one help desk for everybody, and that's changing fast in 2026. Industry-specific AI tools are pulling ahead. So you have companies that are building one tool for one industry. Think of Sierra in customer service, Harvey in legal, Hippocratic in healthcare, even up in injury law. So analysts are calling this vertical AI. It's eating the $450 billion software market. A lot of these tools now price on outcomes instead of seats. And we're going to dive into that. Nick, for a boring B2B, when do you think an industry-specific AI tool beats the generic one that everybody already knows? And when is vertical just higher price tag the same thing?
Before I answer that question directly, I'll meander a bit because I think it's relevant. I think due diligence now is more important than ever because, as we've talked about a lot on this show, it's cheaper than ever to build software. So there's now more options than ever, especially when you get into niche software. And because of that, there's some great products out there, but there's also some that might be vibe coded or look good on paper, but when you start using them, have reliability issues or just not be that robust. And I think we've seen different flavors of this too when we're looking at, say, some of the sales and marketing tools that we're doing and really diving in and understanding, are these products giving me insights or functionality that some of the more generic platforms don't? And if so, do they truly provide that, or is it a lightweight facade without a lot of depth or reliability? And again, we've signed up for a lot of trials, used it, and then realized it does one thing pretty well, but when you use other table stakes features, they're not as good as the incumbents in that area. So I think just understanding, like, what do you need to operate? What are table stakes from a software perspective in your industry? And then are there advantages that some of these platforms can provide? Maybe it's dashboard, maybe it's integration, and consider that. We're also seeing a lot of consolidation or just products that spin up that don't have product market fit. And they're either being like left to languish or just stop functioning altogether. I think it's sign up for a free trial when and if it makes sense first to really test it before you commit, because we've definitely gone down that road and then realized critical integrations aren't there or there's just a lot of jank in the product itself.
Yeah, I was thinking about this one, and I think there's a very good case for generic SaaS for generic tasks, like note taker apps, for instance. And we use Circleback, shout out Circleback, but we've used so many of them and we've indexed on the quality of the transcripts, right? Because we know how important the transcripts can be for being able to leverage them in other AI use cases, being able to refer back to them. And so that's a generic software that we wouldn't need a service business AI note taker. Same with an email tool. Those are generic. But it's actually good timing because I just got off the call with a vertical SaaS company that scores client relationship health for service businesses. And that is a great example of vertical SaaS, where it actually layers in and ties in with the generic software like Circleback and Gmail, but it is able to layer on top of those tools a lot of industry knowledge. And it is so top of mind for us that we've been talking a lot about how do we know the health of the client relationships that we have. We can track budgets and everything like that, but there's a lot of signals that might come through in a meeting transcript or something. And so anyway, it's not replacing any tools, but a layer on top that gets very industry specific. And I thought that was just a really interesting topical example of vertical SaaS playing really nicely. The outcome-based pricing can get a little bit wonky, and oftentimes comes down to the definitions of those outcomes. You mentioned marketing software before. How many marketing softwares have we worked with that are like, we sent you 50 leads this month, or whatever the metric might be? And you're like, that none of those were actually qualified leads, right? This is all garbage lead generation that you're doing in your definition of what a lead is. But if you end up paying for kind of some of those garbage metrics, you can end up spending a lot for very little value.
Yeah. I think some of this speaks to what we do with integration work, where you might have some middleware, and you alluded to this, where you're still using HubSpot, you're still using these robust platforms, but there might be another very industry specific software that bolts onto that, solves a specific need, and you're not having to rely on a smaller vendor for critical business functions, but they specialize in one area and consume the data that you already have. And we're seeing more and more of that. We're also building those types of solutions, but I see more of that happening than new platforms coming out and taking over the major players in specific industries. I think the last piece on pricing is just the fatigue that you get, because every time you try one of these, it's always another $30, $50, $100 a month per user. And I think that's a big decision-making factor too, because oftentimes you might need 5 different products to achieve what one larger one does for cheaper. And I know we're often having that conversation, so I like to weigh that into the overall value as well.
Yeah, I think you hit it. Like, at the end of the day, vertical doesn't mean turnkey. Like, someone still needs to wire it up and really own it. It is shifting the common 80-20 rule of buying SaaS software, where it solves 80% of your problems, but the remaining 20% are what you really care about and you're kind of stuck with. I think it gets you a little bit further down the line there, but at least what I've seen, some customization layer could still be really valuable to these businesses, because even within a vertical, each business has its own operating structure that the behavior change can be really expensive, and oftentimes more expensive than just building out something that actually works for the way you're doing business today. But on to the second story. This one's a bit of a contradiction. One report out on June 18th said that 96% of organizations running AI agents say they met or beat their ROI targets, which sounds amazing. But if you zoom out, and the broader surveys are a bit uglier, only about 23% of companies say they've gotten significant return from agents. And Gartner says 40% of enterprise apps will have agents baked in by the year end. So adoption is everywhere, but real payoff is rare. And there's a large governance gap, meaning that most teams shipped agents without anyone owning what they do. What's your reaction to this story, Nick?
Hey, it's Mike. Before we continue, thank you for being here. Into the Gnar exists for one reason: to cut through the noise around custom software development and give you something actually useful. We want to build a community around that. So if something in this episode hit, or if there's a topic you want us to go deeper on, leave a comment. It genuinely shapes what we'll make next. Also, if AI is on your roadmap and you're not sure your team's set up for it, we made something for you. It's a free 2-minute assessment over at thegnar.com that tells you exactly where you stand. Link is in the show notes. All right, back to the conversation.
Just to dive deeper at kind of understanding what's being surfaced here. So it sounds like a lot of companies are rolling out AI, and when polled, they seem to indicate that it's working, which is good. But is the 26% implying they're making this investment, but they're not seeing the returns they'd expect given the spend?
Yeah, I believe
Gotcha.
that is the case, where they had certain expectations around ROI that are not being met.
Yeah. And I think we've seen this to some degree too, and have started to make changes. And it's around the metrics that you're collecting and having the ability to track ROI on a more granular level to, I think at a macro level, we clearly understand how much we're paying Anthropic per month, but that's not enough. And from an agency perspective, it's not unique to us. We want to know how much are we spending per project and is it moving the needle in terms of productivity? And I think we're going to see a lot more maturity for collecting this data to automate the ROI tracking, but we're not quite there yet. I know internally we built a platform that uses open telemetry to get cloud metrics, and we can really tie that down to a per project level and use that to recognize how effective these tools are. And I suspect that a lot of orgs maybe aren't there yet, and that might lead to some of this. So maybe the 26% is that only a smaller portion of these orgs have that level of sophistication to truly track that ROI, and they have some gaps there. So I always like to, that's why I was asking clarifying questions on this too, is understand, are you even able to accurately track your spend versus what you're looking to get out of it? Because I suspect a lot of organizations aren't quite there yet. And that probably biased some of the numbers that we're seeing here. But at the same time, I think there's also a lot of unrealistic expectations. You just juice your cloud budget and all of a sudden everyone's a 10x developer. That's not necessarily realistic either, but establishing some type of baseline early on, I think will level set on expectations. It might be that people just don't know what to expect and they're calculating ROI and what they'd like to get out of this based on instincts alone and not data. And they need to start collecting the data and setting the goals based on that first.
Yeah, and the goalposts are shifting with ROI as well, where there's the seat pricing, the token pricing is changing constantly, both with annual plans and monthly plans. The companies aren't making money off of those plans yet. They still have to figure that out. So expect more change there. I actually think the governance question is a really important one, and where most companies miss, and not in the way that governance is often talked about. When I hear companies talk about governance, they're talking about access control, like who can use which models, what connectors are they allowed to use, what data are they allowed to access with their models. And I think that is an important piece to it. But I think the layer that they don't talk about that I would say is arguably even more important is control over what's being created, because you need to have an understanding. The whole value of AI comes through efficiency and process and workflows and all that. And if you've got 10 people in your organization with some similar vibe coded flavor of a something or other, or a skill that does the same thing, that is, the inefficiencies can mount where you get back to square one, where it's the equivalent of those 10 people have spreadsheets that are all doing some flavor of the same thing, and they just haven't shared that knowledge. So I think there's one, you have to go into it with some idea of how you're going to control what's being created, but you have to have a system in place for that, the evolution over time, almost like a backlog of what people want to create. So you can see when someone's asking for leveraging AI to reconcile AR and AP, and you can say, oh, we already did something like this 3 months ago. This would be an easy addition to that system versus creating a whole new one that we're going to abandon and forget about and have broken. To me, that's where all this ROI dies, is that no one's really almost like project managing all of the implementations of AI across the company.
Yeah, I think we could do an entire show or an entire series of shows just on governance, because there's such a gap out there in terms of what you're able to do. Like an enterprise organization likely has the resources and knowledge to implement some really robust solutions, like using something like Bedrock and their main platform and integrating there. They get access control and granular control of models and certainly control on the inputs and what they have access to. But a smaller organization, say a 10-person engineering shop, or maybe even 80-person, isn't necessarily going to have team members that are experienced or familiar with setting up something like that. So they're going to reach for, say, Claude and Claude Desktop, and then use some of the integrations with Google, which is okay, but then you're relying more on, say, Google Drive for access control. And that's just on the input side. And then, like you mentioned, on the output side, if you're talking about engineering and producing these platforms, exactly like you said, you need to establish policy up front. Otherwise, it's saying you vibe coded something and it just auto pushes to Vercel is not a good answer. Not to knock on that, but that's not going to scale or pass muster in any type of regulated environment. So you need to really perform some time up front to roadmap that out and plan for it, and also stick with your plan. Otherwise, like you said, you're going to spend all of your time servicing that mess, and all those efficiencies that you gained by building this thing are lost on the operational side.
And policy is one thing, but it's almost like a jobs to be done backlog, just because, especially as a business scales, you're going to have multiple people performing the same job, right? Think of an account manager or something like that. And there's the value that you can get is efficiency gains through automating jobs to be done and freeing your team up to be problem solvers and provide the necessary human components to it. But if you're not taking ownership of that backlog or creating that backlog, you end up with just so many flavors of the same thing, and it's a waste of time. Yeah. We keep harping on this, but it just feels like shouting into the void sometimes. But these are just tools. If you gave me a baseball bat, I couldn't hit a home run. It is a tool that I don't have the skills to wield. And like the technology of a bat is important. If the MLB played with metal bats, it'd be a very different game. But still, me with a metal bat means nothing. And so it's really learning how to wield the tools and getting good at that piece that is the most important. And maybe a lot of folks don't even need to learn how to use the tools, but the company can do the behind the scenes work where they can take advantage of them, which is kind of where we're going to focus some of the day today. We're going to do what we call the teardown. Let me pose this hypothetical based on real world client to you, and we'll just evaluate this company and kind of give our opinions on how we bring them into the modern day. So this company is called Meridian Supply. They're made up, but they're real enough. $75 million in revenue, industrial distribution. They sell parts and equipment to contractors and plants. They've been around for about 40 years. They've got around 80 employees. They take orders by phone, email, and even a fax machine. The inventory lives in an aging ERP system that everybody hates. Sales lives in 3 reps head, and there's a shared spreadsheet. There's a part-time IT contractor. They make healthy margins. They have loyal customers, but they have no AI. So before we name a single tool here, before we bring out the baseball bat, how do we even decide where to start? Most operators hear AI and want to do the flashy thing, but Nick, what's the actual first move at Meridian?
Think of this like a lot of our engagements where you start at the top and first understand what's important to the business at the highest level. Like, how do they generate revenue? What are the most important KPIs? And understanding the business machine first, I think, is really helpful for a grounding there and completely non-technical, because sometimes there might be either differing of opinion or less that or more priority, and just making sure you're all on the same page of like, at a high level, what are we trying to optimize here? And then get aligned there. And then you go a level deeper and kind of do a process mapping. Like, I think can be a classic during the initial conversations, like a whiteboarding exercise. What are the business units? How do they work? And then again, start at the top and keep drilling down. And then once you understand that and the alignment on the business side of the house, what are the flows? Like, how does data get into this system? And I don't care about the columns or that level of granularity, but I think you touched upon this. If we're talking about orders coming in, the phone, faxes, and literally just mapping all of that out so you can kind of understand what are the moving parts here and what are the implications in terms of KPI and how they relate, where are the bottlenecks, and that's your starting point. And it's not even an AI problem, and it usually isn't until you're pretty far down. You want to identify the bottlenecks. The solutioning is the fun part, and that's the piece that everyone wants to jump into, exactly like you said, but you have to look at the problem first. You can't come at it with a solution like a flashy AI tool and just start whacking it with a baseball bat. You want to be very thoughtful and let data drive the decisions and recommendations that you make.
Yeah, you need to learn the business first. And I think a core piece to that you touched on is like where the data lives and how it's shaped and all of that, where I think there's an unfortunate reality to some of these projects where the first phase is really unsexy and doesn't really provide a ton of ROI, but unlocks the potential by cleaning data, gathering data, seeing where it lives and how it's shaped, and planning how you can leverage this the most. And then that can unlock the rest of the roadmap, which is where you can really bring out the ROI. But you can't just jump right into the fun stuff without getting a real lay of the land and understanding what the data looks like.
Yeah, and talking to people, like we do that right from the start, is literally have interviews, because there's many cases where there might only be one person in the entire org that understands how a particular business function even works. And without knowing that, we can't really do anything at all. And we really need to document and solve for that. And I think with almost any engagement, there's always that one person that has some critical piece of information that we need to help unlock or understand the bottlenecks. And it's really a people problem up front.
Yeah, so let's start walking the building. We'll go station by station here, and you can tell me what to do. So start at the front door. So how does an order come in? We have phone, email, and even fax. So what do we do with the way orders actually come in?
You'd probably want to get a sense of like volume distributed across all of them, because hypothetically, let's say 90% of orders come in via phone, and they get a handful, like one or two via fax. That's helpful information, because we probably don't want to, even though fax could be the easiest solve from a technology perspective, if it's 1 or 5% of incoming orders, we don't need to prioritize that. We want to look at where's the bottleneck, where's the highest volume, where's the biggest risk factors if it goes down, and at least prioritize based on that information, and then start to dive even deeper on like those flows. Okay, phone's 90%. Walk me through what is the end-to-end process of taking a phone order, because it's probably they have staff members and they're integrating with some software and it goes in, but starting from when that order goes in, what is the end-to-end flow? And then understanding the life cycle of the order across each of the mediums is pretty typical. And we don't have any of that information, so can't really say what's the best next step, but I'd always start there. And you might get lucky and it might be they're a tech savvy business and web orders are probably pretty common, but let's say email, like that's pretty easy to automate. So if most of it comes in there, that gives us a good avenue to move the needle using technology because it's already coming in electronically. But I think we need to understand first.
Yeah. There's definitely that discovery component to it, but I think it's important also to maybe talk about how there are pretty easy solutions across the board here for automating these parts of the process. And it's pretty easy to quantify value, right? If you could say, maybe manual order entry takes about 20 minutes for an order, 10 to 12 bucks an order for a mid-market distributor, like that could be $250,000 to $500,000 a year just keying up orders, right? So it's easy to get to the point where, like, this is hypothetical information, but like it's easy to get to the point where you can actually quantify the amount that you're spending in these jobs that are easy to automate. And we're doing projects now and have done projects for companies that are very similar to this, where you can have a note taker app. I mentioned it earlier, generic SaaS note taker app that sits along your phone calls, and you can then tie into those transcripts and draft orders, pre-populate orders and draft them. Similar email, we've created apps where you have an email inbox that gets monitored that you can create draft orders from. Text messaging systems where you can take an inbound text and build an order from it. So there's real ways. I think this is one of the highest leverage places actually, where you can have high savings for relatively low effort.
Yeah, I completely agree. Another, as I'm thinking through our experience in this realm, another area that often gets discovered at this phase is just the quality of data itself too, because if they don't have any systems in place or have good data quality, you really need to solve for that. If you can't associate someone with an order number or their name in a quick, sane fashion, you want to get their ducks in a row there first and get the fundamentals in place before you can start implementing some of these tools. So sometimes we get lucky and they do have a well-disciplined team with good CRM and order management systems in place, but sometimes it's all over the place and there's duplicate customer data, and you really want to think about that at the beginning as well, because data is only as good as the quality is only as good as your inputs. You want to put safeguards and processes in place up front too.
Because the data is one thing, but you might have your own kind of validation rules that kind of make sure that the data actually is valid by the definition of your business, or you're making sure that you're the proper guardrails in place, which kind of brings us to the next piece here around quoting and pricing. So let's say we get quotes are going out slow and sometimes wrong. What do you think changes here?
I think that is a wonderful segue for the point just made, that the G-rated phrase is bad data in, bad data out. And I think that's a root cause for a lot of these slowdowns. If you really dive into what's causing quotes to go out slow, it might be like manual association of customer to order and all that fun stuff. So really diving in and understanding what's the root cause of the bottleneck. And I think at least 50% of the time it's either data quality or integration issues. Systems aren't talking to each other in an efficient manner, and putting that on the roadmap to solve could drastically reduce the speed in which orders or quotes go out.
Yeah, one of the companies I was talking to, it takes them a year to onboard new sales reps because there's so much of internal information and checks and validation that has to happen on things like pricing and quoting for their customers. And so that's where you could just have an absolutely enormous ROI, where more like an 80-20 rule, where you can leverage AI and get the speed out of building out that quote. But then you could build in logic that might flag certain quotes if they're not meeting some of these guardrails, right? If gross margin is going to be below a certain percent or whatever the case may be. And then you have someone who is more knowledgeable, able to step in and tweak the quote to then send it out. But just by some enhancements there, you could take that onboarding time from a year down to weeks.
Yeah. And that brings up another excellent point. You need to measure it to understand what is the definition of flow, what is fast. And sometimes it's as simple as building a dashboard that's showing thresholds of throughput. How fast are these going through? Because they might not know at all. And that's part of the slowness. They just weren't aware for whatever reason. And oftentimes they have access to this information. They just haven't sat down and define what their expectations are for like SLAs and getting orders out, build some simple dashboards. And something like that is a quick, easy solve. And we've seen that be really effective.
Yeah, this next one is one that we deal with all the time. It's around inventory forecasting and dead stock. So ERP systems. I have not talked to a single company that actually enjoys their ERP system. These are often oversold and underdelivered. But in this case, let's say Meridian's got an ERP system that is old and inventory is a bit of a guessing game. Are we ripping it out? What's the build versus buy here?
I think the saving grace for a lot of the scenarios we've encountered is these ERP systems have APIs and can expose the data. It just the tooling for inventory isn't necessarily there, or it's difficult to use. So if we're able to at least get access to the data, I think there's a lot we could do with better insights into inventory. And that's a great opportunity for layering in some AI tooling on the more sophisticated side, or maybe it is building an MCP layer that is tuned into inventory forecasting. I think it's starting with what levels of exposure do you have via these systems? Because even the most legacy of ERPs, we often are pleasantly surprised. It might be an old XML SOAP API, but we can still get at that data. It doesn't come with a good native solution. So once we can bolt on these interfaces, it turns out there's a lot we can do. And many times it's more affordable to do that than to buy the ERP module for this, because oftentimes it can be really kludgy or generic and they have very specific needs. And we can build something highly custom. It still uses that as a source of truth, but is exactly what they need and get deployed into their infrastructure. And done a lot of work in this space.
Yeah, for sure. And changing ERPs is an absolute headache. And we have one client that spent over $500,000 attempting to change their ERP and then gave up after that time. And so headache, super costly, and almost all the time just not worth it. But yeah, to your point, you can build on top of them. And we found a lot of success with the workflow optimizations where you build a nice user experience with a lot of validations and guardrails that we've talked about that just layers on top of the ERP and syncs back. So the data is all in the ERP system for folks to be able to use as they need to, but people don't have to deal with it on a day-to-day basis as much. All right. So we're going to bring this all together here with kind of maybe a trap that we've just fallen into. So we just described about a year's worth of software projects, or just a lot of work to be done. So how does Meridian do all of this and not wake up one day as an accidental software company with a code base that nobody owns?
That is a very relevant question. When we're performing a lot of these due diligence, I think one very important aspect of that is a build versus buy analysis upfront, because the worst thing that we could do, or I think any organization for that matter, is reinvent the wheel. And there is a lot of great software out there that integrates through these systems. So we always like to rule that out right away. A classic example is a ticketing system. There's so many good options out there. Explore that first, or anything adjacent to that space. Explore that early on, but do that level of due diligence upfront. And then from there, you start to build out the roadmap and identify. It's usually some flavor of integration work that is leveraging the existing systems, buying some software that fill the gap that you have, and that software is best of breed and works well. And then for hopefully the relatively rare cases where you do need to do a custom build, put that on the roadmap, but you just need to be really disciplined, because just because AI makes it easy to build all of these things doesn't mean that it's a right decision. We always say earn the complexity, and building custom software and maintaining it is really complex. And you need to have that level of discipline and put a price tag to it, and make sure that you're thinking through the ROI, not only in terms of the build cost, but the maintenance of that over 1, 3, 5+ years. Do you have the staff and expertise to do it? It still happens. It still needs to happen, but it's not just because you can. You should when it comes to the custom software side. And I think another piece is it's okay to do some pilot projects. You don't necessarily need to commit all in. You might want to take a very narrow slice or solve a specific problem. Maybe it is a custom build that integrates with your existing software, but launch an internal pilot project to assess whether it's worthy of future investment. In some cases it is, and in some cases it isn't, but that's okay to put that on the roadmap as well.
So if you're on Meridian right now, listening to this episode, and you take one thing away from this, what is it?
Due diligence and discovery up front, even though if it sounds like a lot of work and you might not necessarily get actual software to solve your problem, like it pays for itself 10x, and it's worth it. You're going to document gaps that you likely have. You're going to get a better understanding of your organization. You're going to get a better idea of what it's going to cost. But I'd say the worst thing you can do is jump in and just start building things. Do the discovery and due diligence upfront.
Yeah, whether it's fad diets or AI implementations, there's no escaping the hard work. That's our episode. If you run a boring, profitable business and you've been waiting for permission to start small, this was it. Find the leaks, clean the data, buy before you build, and own what you ship. You don't have to become a software company to get the upside. 2 quick things before we go. First, our AI for Operators event series. We ran the first one, it filled up, so we're doing 3 more. The next one is on Tuesday, that's June 30th. If you missed the first one, this is your shot. It's built for exactly the operator we spent this whole episode talking about. Details and sign up are in the show notes. Second, our next episode, we've got Cam Salem from Headlight Partners, a growth equity firm. He's joining us. We're getting the investors' read on what actually makes a business valuable in an AI world and what they look for under the hood before they write a check. So you won't want to miss that. If today got you thinking about your own shop, we built a free 2-minute AI readiness assessment that tells you exactly where you stand. It's at ai-assessment.gnar.com. The link's also in the show notes. Until next time, stay curious, stay sharp, and we'll see you in the Gnar.